what would be like the utility of studying language?
Well, let's talk about, I guess, maybe the utility of studying speech production, because that's what I do, and
Sure.
that's what I know more about. Well, if you want to take real world examples, even outside of the field of speech production science, where's all right. So my iPhone here, my microphone is currently broken. But if I were to talk to Siri,
Yeah.
and Siri's to understand me and talk back to me in a way that I can understand, none of that is possible without the work that we do.
Oh, wow.
So by studying how humans do this and how we do it efficiently and well, we're better able to inform the models for both speech recognition of computers and then speech synthesis and production. So if you look at teams, really large technical teams who work for these sort of goals, like Google or Amazon or whoever, they always have linguists working with them as part of the team, because you need to understand how the humans work in order to then better develop the correct models.
Oh, that's interesting. Yeah, you have to be able, so you can mimic what they are doing. Okay. So you're looking in our project. When I worked with you, we're looking at the differences between the tongue shape differences between singing and speech. Tell us a little bit about that, because are you still working on a project?
Yeah, so that's an ongoing project that eventually we'll be able to publish something with it, but it's a lot of work because we have a lot of data to sift through. From the preliminary results, what we find is that one constant difference across these singers that we're looking at is the importance of opening up the oral cavity to allow air to flow and resonate. So no matter what the vowel is, so examples of vowels are like E, A, U, A, O. Let's go through them. So E, E, A, O, U. Okay? So the tongue has to be in a very specific place for you to be able to recognize what that vowel is, right? And that's different from, so E versus U, the tongue is in a completely different place. Regardless, singers will still move the position of the tongue in a way that sort of balances being able to have the audience still recognize what that vowel is, but then also provide enough air in the oral cavity for air, or enough room in the oral cavity for air to come through and resonate. That seems to be one of the primary goals for these professional singers, is positioning the vocal tract in a way that you can still make smaller changes of the tongue and get distinction between vowels, but then overall the vowels still have a large area for air to move and resonate.
Right. So when we think about the voice and the movement of the tongue and other parts of the vocal tract, what is it altering per se? I mean, you're moving the tongue, but I think Formant Frequencies was something that we covered in that unit.
Yeah, so that's also an area that we're still trying to figure out what precisely acoustically is the goal of speech, and what is the goal of production, and what is the goal of perception. Formant frequencies are a good way to distill vowel sounds down into just a number of different variables that we can measure and then describe differences between vowels. They also seem to be important for perception between vowels. So if you synthesize just those formants and you don't have all that extra acoustic information, you can still reasonably get a difference between different vowels. But the real answer is much more complex than that, and we're still trying to dig into, in this very complex acoustic system, what is actually important for perceiving sounds as not only different sounds, difference between E and oo, but what, for example, makes a sound sound like robotic, like Siri? Or how do you know that that is Siri and not an actual person on the phone? We're still not there yet, and it's that kind of research where we try to better understand what are we missing in those acoustics that we can better replicate.
Right. So do we know, how much do we know about that so far?
Less than we should. So Formant Frequencies work very well, but they're based ultimately off of modeling the vocal tract as a straight tube, and that has varying constrictions along it. And that's a model that's now about 50 or 60 years old that I believe we can definitely improve upon to get more accurate results. So, for example, formant changes that we contribute broadly to how high the tongue is in the mouth or how forward it is in the mouth. They differ depending on where the tongue was first at in the mouth. So if the tongue is forward in the mouth, moving it up and down or forward and back doesn't quite have the same result as if the tongue is far back in the mouth, moving it up and back and forth doesn't give the same results.
Oh, that's interesting. Why?
Because the vocal tract is not a straight tube. It's a very complicated system that is, first of all, it's not straight. It's got mucus. It can change its shape as air builds up. It can increase in its volume. It's a very dynamic system that is different from speaker to speaker. So we really need to get a better understanding of what is common across speakers that is still accounted for in that sort of biological system.
Right. Besides the tube model, have they made any sort of mathematical models which resemble the vocal tract more accurately?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. And even very small parts of the vocal tract. So a lot of headway has been made in just modeling the vocal folds. Okay? So the vocal folds are in your larynx, and they are folds of flesh, basically, that are held together through cartilage that you can either open them or close them. And that's a very simplistic model of vocal folds. You open them and close them. Well, really, there's a third dimension where it has thickness, and then the vocal folds, as air builds up behind them, they start to separate at the bottom or than the top, and then as soon as there's high enough pressure, then they open, and then they come back together in a reverse order. So the Bernoulli effect in action. And that sort of three-dimensional aspect to just a very small part of the vocal tract, there's been lots of researchers who have worked in trying to account for all of those differences mathematically, and have come up with actually some very accurate models. And that's just, a centimeter of the vocal tract.
This reminds me of like chemists and physicists trying to model like just subatomic particles within like 10 nanometer space, and it takes all the computing power they have for like 10 nanoseconds,
Yeah. But to understand the entire system, you have to understand the parts, right?
You have to, yeah.
Yep.
What has been a challenge in your field in characterizing these the differences or the vocal tract? What's the biggest challenge in your opinion?
The biggest challenge, I would say, is finding still the most accurate mapping between what goes on in the vocal tract and what we record in the acoustics. So what we were talking about previously is once you have the acoustic signal, what parts of those are important for perception and describing a vowel. But even before you get there, we still don't have a complete understanding of a unified description of when the vocal tract changes in very specific and minute ways, how does that affect the acoustics? Because that is, we'll go back to the example of the nasal vowels. So that's completely different when the vocal tract changes if the velum is open or if the velum is closed and no air is coming out of the nose. And then when the velum is lowered and open, those changes, the effect on the acoustics is not the same. So one, it's a modeling issue, but the bigger problem is still trying to find a way of getting the correct data, because you always have a trade-off between how accurate both spatially and temporally your signal is and what you can measure, and then also what you get from the acoustics. So this system right here, the ultrasound, this works really well for getting good spatial and temporal resolution. And as you can see, I have nothing in my mouth, so we can get really good acoustics, but we're limited in what we're looking at, right? The tongue is only one part of the vocal tract. It's a very large part of the vocal tract, and it's a very interesting part, but we're not getting all the information. So in order to get that, you have to use different tools, and those tools only look at a different part of the vocal tract. And so then you get decades of research where everyone is trying to use all of these different pieces to try to understand that question. Right. And I think the answer is ultimately going to be an MRI because you get all the information about the vocal tract, right. But the downside is the acoustics aren't as good.
Right, because it's so loud.
It's very loud, yes.
It's super loud, yeah. That's interesting, yeah. It's as I'm talking with you, it reminds me of my own project. I have this issue of, if I want to be have high temporal resolution, I miss on the spatial resolution. If I want the spatial resolution, I can't get the temporal resolution, and so I can only get a snapshot of things, and then it's through multiple snapshots with different techniques can you start to build an image of what's happening.
Classical problem of signal processing. Any signal has that problem. Yep.
Yeah. Thanks for listening to BLab Codes. Rate and review our podcast on iTunes or wherever you get your podcast, because it does help us spread the word. And if you like what we're doing here, then help us grow it by sharing this with a friend of a friend, or your mailman, even your mailman's mailman. We also want to hear from you, so send us questions or comments to blabcodes@gmail.com. And if you have any interesting questions or comments, then we'll talk about it on air.